Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Pickering. I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, which is celebrating the opening of a new exhibition, David Gordon Lyon and the Harvard Semitic Museum. And I had the treat of seeing a sort of little preview earlier this week, and I can tell you it looks absolutely amazing. And there are many people in the audience tonight who've played a role in that, and we'll hear more about that later, but really it's a fantastic show. And it highlights the vision, dedication, and legacy of the Harvard Semitic Museum's founder and conveys the relevance of the museum's collections for the study and understanding of Near Eastern cultures. And the project was a collaboration between us, the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, and the Harvard Semitic Museum that is part of that partnership and led by the individuals who we are going to be hearing speak tonight. And so we do invite you, if it's not already obvious from my comments, to join us immediately following this presentation in the Harvard Semitic Museum for a reception so that you too can have a chance to see this wonderful new exhibit. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like, as I normally do, make some announcements about things. First is to say, if any of you are not on our mailing list or email list, please do join, and then you'll get to hear all about the various programs we run at HMSC, and you can do that in a table just outside the door, and that's also where you can find information if you would like to join us. And I have to tell you that, of course, a membership to the HMSC is the world's best present for Christmas or Hanukkah. It's like the best thing. You know, they get a whole year's worth of amazingness. So please feel free. And not only that, you get a free Glass Flowers tote bag if you do it in the next few weeks. So I just have to put a plug in for our membership program. And then finally, I'd like to invite you to join us for our last event of the fall season, which is not actually in our printed programs, but it is obviously all the details on our website. And that is next Wednesday, December 10th at 8 p.m. And the Dudley House World Music Ensemble will be presenting a special concert inspired by the Peabody Museum's exhibition, Arts of War, Artistry and Weapons Across Cultures. And this concert will feature original compositions and an existing repertoire drawn from cultures around the world, including something that sounded very interesting, battle music in Java, and classics dedicated to the war goddess of India. So I think that's going to be a really interesting evening. The concert starts at 8. The galleries will be open, or the gallery, the Arts of War exhibit, will be open from 5, and so you can come a little early, remind yourself, or for the first time visit the exhibit, and then go down and hear this wonderful performance. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Peter de Manwelian, Joseph Green, and Adam Asia. And I was told in no uncertain terms not to say a lot about each of them, and it's true. They're all distinguished scholars and educators, and if I did do a full biography of each of them, there would be no time left for them to speak, and you'd all be probably have left out of tiredness of hearing me speak. But I will say a couple of things. First, Peter de Manwelian, who is the Philip J. King Professor of Egyptology and Director of the Harvard Semitic Museum, as well as Director of the Museum's Studies Program at the Harvard Extension School. And his research interests include ancient Egyptian history, archaeology, and epigraphy, and his Giza project here at Harvard, which gathers online archaeological data on the famous Giza pyramids for teaching and research. Joseph Green is the Deputy Director and Curator of the Harvard Semitic Museum, and in addition to overseeing the diverse research and outreach activities of the museum, he conducts research on the archaeology of the Mediterranean Near East region, with an emphasis on the first millennium BC AD. Adam Asia, our final speaker, is Assistant Curator of Collections at the Harvard Semitic Museum. He oversees many of the projects that ensure the safety and care and use of the museum's collections, and that they are made available to researchers, educators, and the general public. And in addition, he supervises various archaeological projects in the Mediterranean region. So please join me in welcoming Peter, Joe, and Adam. Thank you.
So tonight marks what I hope is the revitalization of the Harvard Semitic Museum. We have great places to go, and we're on the road, and we have some wonderful plans, and I hope we can share those with you in the coming months and even years. But it seemed a good idea to start that road forward by turning backwards and looking back at our roots, where we came from, and to see how we can stay true to our mission and also blend some of our new priorities and mix it into a seamless whole. I think it'll be an exciting road ahead for teaching, for research, for undergrads, for grads, and we welcome you at any at all times. The beginning of this wonderful story goes back to this gentleman, and we're going to split our presentation tonight into three parts. My job is to talk about David Gordon Lyon, the man, and he's become quite a hero of mine, as I hope you'll gather from these remarks. So Lyon was born in Benton, Alabama in 1852 into a Southern Baptist family. And he got his BA in 1875 from Howard College, not Harvard College, but Howard College in Alabama, and then went on to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and that's in Louisville, Kentucky. And it's there that he studied with this man who had a great influence on his life, Crawford Toy, who spent some time in jail because of the Civil War. He was a Southerner as well. And then he went off to Berlin for a couple of years after that and learned a lot about the German research paradigm and how to deal with these wonderful Semitic languages of the Near East. Toy was then summoned to Harvard in 1880, and Lyon came and eventually studied under him there and went on to Germany as well. So Toy sent Lyon on to Leipzig, Germany, where he studied with this gentleman, Friedrich Delitzsch, a rather famous academic, most famous perhaps for his lecture in 1902 on the Babel and Bible debate. And he was claiming that many Old Testament writings were in fact borrowed from ancient Babylonian tales. One of the tales tends to destroy imagery of Friedrich Delitzsch if you're not careful and you don't say good things about it. This is the original Charles Eliot, the famous President Eliot's letter to Lyon, formally appointing him as the Hollis Professor of Divinity at Harvard in 1882. So he comes back and he joins Professor Toy, and we're off and running with the Semitic department. This is the first Assyriology position in the United States. And it lasted until 1910. That's when Toy himself retired, and Lyon slid over from the Hollis Professor of Divinity to become the Hancock Professor of Hebrew and other Oriental languages. Along the way, he married twice, first to a German woman named Tosca, met her during his studies in Leipzig, and they got married in London. Later, she died in a tragic accident in 1904, and in 1910, Lyon remarried to a woman named Mabel Everett Harris Lyon. One of his colleagues wrote that he did not publish all that much. In fact, he said Lyon was a scholar whose standards were so exacting that he published little, lest there should be some imperfection in his work, or lest he should advance some theory which he might afterward be compelled to abandon. So we don't see all that much on the publication front, but a very well-known work and very good and useful one was this Akkadian manual, this Akkadian grammar that Lyon put out in 1885 and then revised in 1902. The better part of the writings, though, are here, and this is the real treasure and where we get to know the man. Lyon kept a daily diary for most of his life, and you see them here. We've got them all in the university archives, something like 38 or 40 books, one book per year, and every day is recorded. And this is a real treasure trove. Through this, we learn about his career, his personal life, his travels, his meetings with the famous scholars of the day. It's also the history of Harvard, his interactions with President Eliot, and of course the history of ancient Near Eastern scholarship as well. So in this little-known treasure trove of an archive, we can watch the Semitic Museum grow from a concept to a building to a very, very successful enterprise. And speaking of successful enterprises, we should also mention Lyon's star pupil, most famous student, by a man named George Andrew Reisner. Here you see him in the class of 1889, born in Indianapolis, heading east to Harvard, where he began studying with Lyon. Reisner started out, as you would expect, as an Assyriologist, learning all of these wonderful languages, Biblical Hebrew and Akkadian and Arabic, and Lyon sent him to Berlin after his PhD, so after 1893, to study for a few years there and publish cuneiform inscriptions. But he got the bug, or was tainted by Egyptology in Berlin, and studied with the great ones of the Berlin School at the time. And in fact, later on, he turned to Egyptian archaeology and began excavating from 1899 onwards. So we then come to 1901 and 1902, and Lyon and his wife Tosca take a year's leave, and they travel through the ancient Near East. He would love to do that, through the Near East at the time, not only visiting all of these fantastic sites, but starting to collect objects for this new idea, this new Semitic museum. And here he is at George Reisner's camp in Middle Egypt, a place called Girga, or Naga Adair, and everyone is having tea. And down in the lower right, you can see the vista from the camp across the fields into the Nile. And now, of course, there are high-rises and development all over the place, so you won't have that view again. Along the way, they met famous people as well, such as the Newport businessman Theodore Davis, whose house is at the Point at Newport. Unfortunately, it doesn't stand anymore. It's a public park. But Davis was quite an eccentric character and paid for excavations in the Valley of the Kings for about a decade. And in fact, some of our greatest Egyptian treasures, like these that you'll see in our exhibition, come as generous gifts from Davis's excavations. Along the way, Lion took pictures. So in addition to those wonderful diary entries chronicling every step of the way at home and abroad, there are photos as well. His first was on Christmas Day 1901, a photograph of Reisner himself, and then onwards through Egypt and Jerusalem and all over the Near East and on the way home. This is just a wonderful shot of the famous Colossi of Memnon at Thebes, modern Luxor. Here are his travels through Jerusalem, and you'll see this in a rotating slideshow in the exhibition. I love the then and now comparisons too. We could do a whole booklet on these and comparing Lion's views to what things look like today. This is the Amalfi Coast on the way home after his travels. And I mentioned the purchase of artifacts as he assembled this collection. He was also buying plaster cast reproductions. Back in those days, these were the teaching tools or the virtual reality of their day. The Museum of Fine Arts, the Metropolitan, all the great museums were buying these plaster casts of great works of art to use as teaching tools. Can't see it very well, but that's the Victory Stela of Esarhaddon, and it's about 11 feet tall or so. It's on the third floor of our museum now. We're hoping to expand on that concept as well, but now it's all about 3D printing rather than plaster casts. So here is Jacob Schiff, the New York businessman who fell in league with Lion, and Lion's charisma, I think, overcame the day and convinced Schiff to fund not only excavations in the lands of the Bible, but also to build this wonderful building, which is right next door to us. 1903 is when it was completed. And we're trying to carry that mission further. We've just constructed the very first elevator to the building, and Adam will tell you more about that project. It's out behind, and through some wonderful architectural wizardry, it actually looks like it's always been there. So I mentioned Lion's photography, his meticulous diaries, but we also have every single receipt and purchase and list and object notations that he ever made. And this is also a treasure trove. So if you're interested in the dealers of the age and prices and purchase and excavations and object history, we have also a treasure trove in our archives. So I think you can get the idea that the man was so busy by this point, teaching, fundraising, traveling, getting his building built. President Eliot, no less, had to write him a letter at one point and say, have you not proposed too much work for yourself next year? 11 hours divided into 7 courses makes a hard year's work. Might not one or more of these courses be bracketed? That means postponed to another year. For instance, need number 6 be given every year? Number 6 was Babylonian Assyrian history, by the way. And if you look in the catalog, it ends up bracketed, so at least he was listening. Back in Egypt now, George Reisner was digging with the support of Phoebe Apperson Hearst, the mother of William Randolph Hearst, until 1904. She had some financial issues and actually had to pull out, leaving Reisner's expedition high and dry. And it was Lion who was the key player for what happened next. This is what I call the summer of intrigue in 1905. Back here in Cambridge, all of these players had their different agendas, and they all jockeyed for position. The Museum of Fine Arts, Harvard University, President Eliot, the Egyptologists, Reisner and his assistant Albert Lithgow down below, and in the middle, playing diplomat and negotiating between all the parties was Lion, looking out for the best interest of all institutions and all individuals in a fair and amicable agreement. And that turned out to be the Harvard University Boston Museum of Fine Arts expedition, which lasted from 1905 through Reisner's own death in 42 and officially up until 1947. So 40 years, 23 different archaeological sites in Egypt and Nubia, and Lion was the one who really set it in motion. And then Reisner took the ball and ran with it. Everything in red you see here is a Harvard MFA expedition site. So these are the sources for the spectacular treasures that you know so well in the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, but it's also the birth of actual archaeological, responsible scientific method. That means attention to stratigraphy, photographic documentation, meticulous notes, numbering systems, object records, all there, all developed by Reisner as he brought archaeological method forward. And it wasn't just Egypt, it was Nubia as well. So he organized and deciphered the sequence of Nubian kings, excavated pyramid sites, and really created an entire field of Nubian studies, which is now broken off from Egyptology in its own right. Lyon returned to the area in 1906 and 7 to be director of the American School of Oriental Research, and he traveled around the area trying to document various sites. Sometimes plundering was going on. He tried to do the best he could to at least document the records and see what would happen to the objects. And then by 1908, 9, and 10, he was instrumental in organizing Harvard excavations at Samaria in Palestine. And in those days, you needed permission or a firman from Constantinople to work in this Ottoman-controlled area. So that took a while. And Reisner was the one who ran the dig from 1909 to 10. And you can see from this plan how complex the area was and how exemplary the archaeological procedures were as well. This publication didn't come out until much later, 1924, but look at the incredibly detailed layering that you see in all the different colors of this reproduction. And then the upper right is the only photo I've ever seen of Reisner in situ in Samaria. Unfortunately, he has his rear end to the camera in the upper right, but that's the best we can do. Back home, Lyon was the quintessential Cantabrigian. He lived at 5 or 6 different locations, moved every few years or so, and we can see a few of them. He was on Lowell Street for a while, and then on Massachusetts Avenue. Obviously, these buildings still stand. This, unfortunately, is the site of the tragic death of his first wife, Tosca. And then eventually, with his second wife, he moved just to the other side of the Divinity School on Scott Street, and that house still stands, and I imagine it's worth multiple millions of dollars if you tried to purchase it today. So his real estate may be viewed all over town. And then, even though he retired in 1922, he remained active with the museum all the way until his death in 1935, and he is buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. And you can visit the tombstone there where all of his family members are gathered together, the families of his first wife and second wife, and also his son, David Gordon Lyon, Jr. One biographer wrote, "A true Southern gentleman in aspect and character, dignified in bearing, kindly in spirit, deeply religious, Professor Lyon commanded the respect of his acquaintances and the affection of his intimates." And another one wrote, Professor George Barton of the University of Pennsylvania, in his obituary, "We've lost a devoted helper, a dignified and courtly gentleman in whom the old traditions of the South still lived, one who made himself the companion of his pupils and their lifelong friend." So in our exhibition, we've tried to communicate that personal touch in the show, in the choice of objects, and in some of the photographs and notes. And I hope that you'll be able to feel that personal touch come across even as we look at the scholarship and the creation of this institution that we all hold so dear. Thanks so much. And now to learn more about the building itself, I'm going to call Joel Green up to the podium.
So the Semitic Museum building in this rendering by the architect gives you some idea of how the building was envisioned when around the time it was built, 1903. And remarkably, it hasn't changed that much. Here you see an actual photograph from the opening program in 1903. There's the building today, 1906, more than 100 years later. Except for the plantings and maybe the strollers with straw boaters, it hasn't changed that much, even though the photographs were taken a century apart. Now, I'll remind you of the location as it stands today. There you see the building itself. The large white roof structure next to it is the building we're in right now, the Yenching Library. But it's the neighborhood has grown up considerably around it in the last 100-odd years. And what I want to show you is really how different the landscape was, how different the neighborhood was when the building first went up. This is from the Bromley Atlas, 1903. It shows the neighborhood of the museum, and there you see in that rose color the Harvard buildings that occupied this corner. The large L-shaped building is the University Museum. Just above that is the Peabody Museum. They hadn't yet been connected. Across the street, there are two buildings that occupy The other side of Divinity Avenue, Divinity Hall, and the Farlow Library, which was then the Divinity School Library, and next to it, the Semitic Museum. Now, the Semitic Museum in Lyon's conception was, I think, more than just a building. It was, I think, a result, as Peter alluded, of his exposure in Germany to the Oriental Seminar. And he brought with him that idea back to Cambridge to create on Divinity Avenue an institution, not just a building that was a museum in which objects were exposed in vitrines, but an institution devoted to the study, research, publication, and public exhibition of the ancient Near East. And he may have actually been looking at something like this. This is the Haskell Oriental Museum at the University of Chicago, that upstart institution in the Midwest, my alma mater, by the way, which, in fact, in advance of Harvard, had its own Near Eastern program and its own museum. We know that Lyon visited there, met with the president, William Rainey Harper, who himself was a scholar of the ancient Near East. This institution morphed into something that was much grander after the First World War, the Oriental Institute. It has this odd name, but it was really devoted to the ancient Near East. This idea, I think, was percolating in Lyon's mind, and he was already interested in seeing how this might work out as a structure. This structure was never built. This is designed by R.C. Sturges already at the very end of the 19th century, but it has all the elements that eventually went into the Semitic Museum building: a large lecture hall, a series of lecture rooms, a library, a rather large one, and an exhibition space, and there in the corner, the curator's room. This was a structure designed for only a single floor. There is a basement level, but it was only a machine space. In the event, the building of the Semitic Museum, all of these elements were included in a 3-story building with a basement that was still only a machine space. Now, before the building was built, the collection was already being formed. In fact, Lyon began to assemble the collection in 1889, and the space to display it was provided by the Peabody Museum across the street. This is the 4th floor of the Peabody Museum with the Semitic collection installed. There you see from Lyon's collection of teaching slides the rough plan of that floor. This rather dim slide is the picture of the 4th floor of the Peabody as it is today. It is virtually unchanged except for the contents displayed. It's now the South Pacific. And there is an interesting parallel that you will, here you see the display furniture in the 4th floor is this very, very characteristic late Victorian display furniture. Vitrines on top, storage furniture underneath. Here you see the 2nd floor of the Semitic Museum in 1903 as it was installed, virtually identical except for that atrium entrance in that floor. Same display furniture, same narrow vitrines. If you go to the 4th floor of the Peabody today, you will see exactly this furniture in situ, still in use. When the museum was converted in the 1950s, a story I'll get to at the end of my talk, all of this furniture was dismantled and thrown out. It was not actual furniture. It was built in, and it could not be saved. There's one interesting detail. You see, this is the sign, Pacific Islands, that labels this 4th floor of the Peabody. That sign up there, Semitic Collection, we found in the attic. It's now attached to a large case which we use for the museum shop. Seems appropriate. But you can see the styles are identical. It is certainly the label that hung over the 4th floor in the Peabody before 1903 to signal to the visitor this was the Semitic collection within the Peabody Museum. Now, here's a detail of that Bromley Atlas that shows you the juxtaposition at the end of Divinity Avenue. That rather thin building there was the first building on the street. It's the original Divinity School, Divinity Hall, built in 1826. It gave its name to the street. The building set back from it is Farlow Hall, the Divinity School Library. We have notes from Lyon's own diaries talking about unpacking crates of antiquities stored in the basement of Farlow Hall, being brought to the Peabody Museum, that standalone structure there on the opposite side of the street, to be displayed there. And there you see the Semitic Museum just next to it. The landscape has greatly changed, and we have been surrounded by science museums and rather cut off from one another. So the easy juxtaposition of Divinity School, Peabody Museum, and Semitic Museum are now divided by latecomers. We feel a bit like we've been colonized by science. Now, speaking of that, you'll notice that there's a large blank space there from Divinity Avenue over to Oxford, north of Kirkland. Some of the existing residential structures are obscured by part of the map, but that used to be a neighborhood. What was planned for that neighborhood but never built was this science quadrangle, also designed by A.W. Longfellow, the builder of the Semitic Museum. And the Semitic Museum is just at the far edge, the north, it's the northeast edge, the north being toward that large tower. This was Longfellow's concept for a science quadrangle in the north yard of Harvard. It was never built, probably just as well, because it would have reflected science buildings of the late 19th century. In fact, even though it was built in the early 20th, those buildings all have to be torn down now to be replaced by modern science buildings, because you can't do 21st century science in a 19th century building. This was never built, except for that center structure, which is the Agassiz Theater. It was transposed and built itself in the Radcliffe Clod. Here you have Longfellow's original blueprint for the facade of the building. Now notice it is the east elevation, although the building faces west. The building was originally intended to be built across the street at number 7 Divinity Avenue, now occupied by a science building built, I think, after 2000. We don't know why the transposition occurred. The surviving plans in our archives all reflect this orientation, east facade, facing east. The entire plan of the building is flipped. So looking at it is quite disorienting, because we know that certain parts of the buildings are in another location. And we never have located the original plans as built. Maybe they didn't exist, we don't know. But this, the fineness of detail in this architect's plan is really rather revealing. What may have happened is that there was a ready availability of land at number 6. We know that Isabella Batchelder gave to Harvard, well, sold to Harvard for the sum of $1, the plot of land on which the building now stands. It was actually numbered number 3. Number 3, Divinity Avenue, doesn't exist anymore. This is number 2. Next door is 3 and 6. And across the street is 7. Don't look for the numbers. If you have to ask, you really shouldn't be here. Now, when the building site was acquired and the building actually began, that was only the beginning of Lyon's troubles. And he had a constant anxiety about getting the building built and furnished. And here you see an entry in his diary for 1900. He's concerned about the lack of stone and steel to put the building up. Eventually it was built, and in fact it was functioning as an office and teaching building before the galleries themselves were actually opened, probably in 1902. The galleries were being furnished by objects that Lyon himself bought in that trip he took in 1902. There's a large part of the original collection that came in that year, and we expect it was because Lyon was traveling abroad, desperately buying things to fill up 2 floors of galleries. Here you see a view of the 3rd floor, rather fantastic. That skylit space still exists, although the expanses under the low-ceilinged areas are now filled up by offices. Here you see a typical late Victorian museum, a space filled with cases filled with stuff, not too many labels. You just went in and kind of absorbed it all. Things have changed enormously. We display a little bit of what we have, and the rest is put in the basement. And the building, of course, is overstuffed because the basement was never intended to be a storage space. It's been transformed enormously. We won't be able to show you that tonight. Well, you'll see the inside of the building, which has been transformed by some new ideas and a new force we hope will carry the building into its next century. When Lyon organized the museum, it was all there. Everything was displayed. That was the theory of display. You put everything out. What wouldn't fit in the vitrines, you stored in storage furniture that was actually in the galleries. So a form was drawn up, and this was the guide to the exhibits as they stood. And that was fixed, it was done. What Lion hadn't reckoned on was that things would change. Things did change in ways that he could not control. The university administration, a decidedly unfriendly President Lowell succeeded President Eliot. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire was out, the French and British mandates were in. And then there was World War II, which drew Harvard into the war effort, changed the uses of the building for those years in which the war took place. But it was the post-war world that really provided not the death knell, but the near mortal wound of the building. And I won't blame Henry Kissinger for what happened when the building was converted from the museum into an office building that housed the Center for International Affairs in the late 1950s. He's eminently blamable for many things, but not the conversion of the building. The man standing next to Kissinger, the fair gentleman in the center of the first row, is Robert Bowie, who was at the time a senior social scientist, a man who founded the Center for International Affairs to solve the problems of the Cold War. And the center occupied 6 Divinity Avenue for about 20 years before it moved out to other quarters. And the Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations Department, which was the successor of the Semitic department in which Lion originally taught, moved in. We have since shared the building with that department and the Center for Jewish Studies. So there is a concentration of expertise and objects in that building. It's not really big enough for any of us, but we share it as best we can. I'll ask Adam Aja now, my colleague, to speak a bit about the collection itself, how it was assembled by Lion, and how we use it today in a much different way, I think, than Lion might have envisioned, but in a way I think he would have approved of. Adam?
So the title of our new exhibit is From the Nile to the Euphrates, Creating the Harvard Semitic Museum. My role here tonight is to introduce you to some of the collection that Lion assembled and to discuss our creation of this new exhibit. Some of you may have noticed there is a current trend in scholarship to use a colon in absolutely every lecture title, book title, article title. It tends to follow the general pattern of some cutesy or rhyming title, some literary reference like A Lion Roars, Creating the Harvard Semitic Museum, or some other such ridiculousness. I've tended to avoid these in my scholarship, and just opting for the more straightforward and boring title after the colon. But actually, in this case, I think that both parts of our title are vital, are very important. The first title suggests the range of geography and cultures illustrated by the Semitic Museum's collection, and the subtitle informs the visitor that the exhibit will reveal some of our institution's founding story, our genesis. The first curator slash director, David Gordon Lion, took Harvard on a journey introducing its students to the contributions of the Semitic-speaking world. And the Semitic Museum, under the leadership of our new director, Peter Manuelian, has also embarked on a new journey, as he stated, a journey of revitalization, a journey that's integral to the university and to the new Museum of Science and Culture. So at this time, while we were looking forward, we did feel that it was important to reflect on where we had come from. This exhibit is designed to enable our visitor to go on a journey with us to discover the amazing breadth of the collection that was assembled by Lion. Lion began collecting pieces to be used in teaching, including a small collection of tablets and small casts. He was an Assyriologist, as you know, and so objects illustrating Mesopotamian language were quite important. He also included larger plaster casts as he could, and these were purchased from museums in Berlin, London, and Paris. You can see one here. I've reproduced one modern resin cast for the Semitic Museum's main lobby. You'll see that on your visit. But as you've seen, the collection did grow, and it was exhibited originally in the Peabody Museum before the present building was constructed. And it does appear that the Semitic Museum's galleries and exhibits were originally designed to echo that of the Peabody Museum where it began. Tall cherry wood cabinets filled with wondrous things. In 1902, you know that the museum was being constructed, and Lion did make these trips to the Middle East to acquire objects, and he was accompanied by his wife, Tosca. But while on that trip, he learned how to take photographs from his former student, George Reisner. Reisner was even the subject of his very first picture, taken on Christmas Day, as Peter cited. And you can see it here. I'll admit, not a very great picture, but you do cut him a little bit of slack. It's not as simple as whipping out your iPhone. You can also see a page from one of his diaries, where he actually records the experience. He says, learn, down in the middle, learned to photograph from Dr. G.A. Reisner at Gurga, Upper Egypt, and took many photographs there. He documented his life, noting everything from the purchase of artifacts to the weather. We reproduced some pages from these diaries throughout the exhibit. Many, many more are available as scans online. Now, while Lion was rarely effusive in his text, there are many great stories to be teased out of these pages. And we wanted to share just a few of these in our galleries, particularly as they pertain to his collection of artifacts and his interactions with the people that he dealt with as curator. His photography did improve tremendously throughout the years, and in addition to his diaries, he also documented his travels and his purchases with a camera. And we've presented many of his images in the exhibit as well, and you saw a slideshow of those as you came in. This is one of my personal favorites, capturing these women on their walk. In 1907, he did return after the tragic year of his wife's death. Lion spent a year serving as the director of the American School of the Oriental Research, and during that time, he also went about the business of acquiring pieces for the museum. As was the practice of the time, he did acquire many of these pieces from antiquities dealers, but he also personally gathered up items for display, including shells and stones that he would gather up from sites that he visited. The creation of the museum was a deeply personal project for Lion, and I wanted to include something in our exhibit that represented the personal nature of Lion's acquisitions. And one of my favorites that you'll see in the exhibit is a small bag of pebbles, still tied up with a label with Lion's handwriting on it. He gathered these up from the Sea of Galilee, from the shores, and I sort of imagined him on his hands and knees, picking away, finding his favorites, as you might if you were on the beach, and putting them in a bag, tying it up, putting it in his coat pocket, and continuing on his horse in his journey. He later accessioned this little bag of pebbles, along with the great treasures he acquired from the dealers. The collection was designed to illustrate all aspects of the Semitic world, not just its language. The galleries did hold objects of great antiquity, but also objects of relative modern 19th century. You can see here some vessels. There was clothing and garments, shoes, fossils, rocks, wood samples, and I enjoy this. Birds of the Eastern Mediterranean are on view. Now, the Semitic Museum of 2014 is very different from the museum of 1903. And although these birds have not survived, we wanted to select objects for our exhibit to best represent the collection of David Gordon Lyon's museum. Several things prompted the new exhibit and revealed the need for it. The gallery where the Lion exhibit is installed held our exhibit on Newsy. This was an excavation the museum participated in what is now modern-day Kirkuk, Iraq. The exhibit was wonderful, but it was installed in 1997 and was really showing its age. Some loaned objects had been returned, leaving gaps in the cases, labels were faded and peeling. The last new exhibit that was installed, Magic in the Afterlife, was quite small and was put up nearly a decade ago. So the time had come for something new. We were already involved in renovating some of the public spaces of the museum. The main lobby was one of the first places that we tackled with the assistance of the HMSC's exhibits team. We added new wayfinding signage, removed some of the visual clutter that was in the space, doing simple things like removing static bulletin boards, that were cluttered with paper with some more versatile digital panels. With our engagement with the HMSC, we anticipated that our public profile was due to rise. This development coincidentally occurred at the same time that we were installing this elevator. The structure, as you can see, was designed to look like it had always been a part of our building, while modernizing it and facilitating our ability to bring visitors into the upper floor galleries. I do have a nice little slide, if I can get it to play. Time lapse of the Semitic Museum being created. A small part. Now, the choice of the exhibit topic. Peter was currently conducting research on Lion, and he suggested the topic of Lion the Man for the exhibit, which we expanded upon to have this Where Did We Come From retrospective. The thought was that since we could reuse some of the cases from Newsy, these 19th century feel, we could put up objects from our own collection that didn't require much in the way of conservation, that we thought this will be a relatively low cost, quick and easy to put up exhibit. And we were really deluding ourselves. There was a tremendous amount of work to do on this. I call it a complicated dance that involved a great number of people operating on a very, very tight schedule. One of our largest artifacts was a massive stone fragment from the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. And this had been located at the base of our main stairs since it was brought to the museum in 1916. While we were investigating the possibility of moving this to the upper floors on our brand new elevator, we discovered a dangerous crack that ran through the middle of it where it had been joined with cement. And you can see on the side here, with some of the cement removed, old bricks that were shoved into the cracks to fill the space, and then the rest had been patched with concrete. This needed immediate restoration. Lacking any other space, the Newsy Gallery was converted into a conservation studio. Thanks to HMSC and Sam Tager, we borrowed a large glass panel and we covered the doorway of the Newsy Gallery and turned it into a workspace for Craig Urum and Jean-Louis Lechevre to use the space for their work. They did a tremendous job, and you can see them working in the upper picture there. You can see down below the object shattered into pieces as it had been taken apart. Not shattered, taken apart carefully. They did a fantastic job putting it back together and mounting it to a steel frame, and infilling and painting the cracks. And Christy Pohl cleaned the stone, and you can see down below, it demonstrates with this in progress view why this was so necessary. You'll see the finished product over in the galleries. After the completion of the work on the ceiling, the gallery space was transformed once again. We wanted to minimize the carpentry while providing an entirely new look and feel for the space. I wanted the visitor feel like they entered a gallery the moment they passed through the vestibule doors to the second floor. We hired Virginia Doherty, who immediately grasped this concept and produced a beautiful design while operating within some tremendous constraints. We moved doors, changed lights, and added a lot of new color. This show simply would not be what it is without her work on this project. Much of the pre-planning took place last May, but then I left the country for 2 months to work on an archaeological expedition in Israel, the Leon Levy expedition to Ashkelon. When I returned in August, I was already dedicated to another project, renovating the collection storage facility. Construction on the new gallery could not begin until September, at which time students were already returning and classes were beginning, which limited the amount of time we could make a construction noise in the gallery. And the exhibit build team, the HMSC staff, were already occupied through mid-October with an exhibit installation in the Peabody Museum. This is The Art of War. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. You need to go. This means that most of the work of fabricating the mounts, conserving the artifacts, writing text, designing the graphic panels, and installation of the exhibit needed to take place in the last month and a half, including a break for Thanksgiving. When you see it, you're not going to believe everything that was done in that short amount of time. This group did a truly incredible job. Several interns and volunteers worked with me to research the collection and prepare the exhibit. In particular, many helped to clean, inventory, and scan Lyon's photographs. I've lost my mouse. Okay. Oh, wait, I've got it back. I apologize to those I forget. But I especially need to thank Tanya Barazon, Adam Middleton, Lichia Alfonso, Diana Damewood, Oz Viasglu, Rob Price, and Greg Williams for the work they did helping. And there are many others that scanned hundreds of diary pages. The construction and paint work took place with GBI, lighting by LAM. The work absolutely could not have been completed on time without the assistance of the building manager, Lori Kuzma, and her entire facilities team. They made sure everything from the floor getting waxed to the lights coming on. And Lori Thomas assisted with editing the massive amount of text down into something that was actually readable. Cassie Catula, a recent graduate of the University College London program in conservation science, emerged like an angel, and she volunteered her services to do conservation on the project. Conserve some of the pieces in the show. She augmented the work of Dennis Piota, you can see in the upper, and Dennis and Jane Piota, who worked on some of the featured pieces in the show, the garment and the peg figurine. The peg figurine is an object which would have been stuck into the base of an important new building. Now, Lyon is our founder. Both a third millennium builder who used this foundation peg and Lyon were equally proud of their work. And we're equally proud of our work here as well. Jan Sacco and the HMSC team really stepped up to the plate on this, and I think they knocked it out of the park. You can see Tristan Roker was the exhibit fabrications coordinator. Tony Greeny, Bill McCann, Donald Bissix, Zachary Hermut were all exhibit technicians working on the project with assistance from Sam Tager. Evan Haynes did the graphic design. I was trying to total up some of the work that was done. And we have over 150 objects, almost half of them requiring new mounts. This doesn't even include the hundreds of lantern slides or photographs that were done and all the new graphic work and text. It was really amazing. This is a great little show. It really is. It celebrates where we came from and heralds where we're going. We're very excited about this, and we think that you will be too. And we welcome you to journey with us when we're done here as we open this new exhibit and this exciting new chapter in the creation of the Harvard Semitic Museum. Thank you.